Welcome to the LDN radio show, brought to you by the LDN Research Trust. I'm your host, Linda Elsiegood. I have an exciting lineup of guest speakers who are LDN experts in their field. We will be discussing low-dose Naltrexone and its many uses in autoimmune diseases, cancers, etc. Thank you for joining us. This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. Today my guest is Bev from Israel, and she's lived in Australia and South Africa, if you're wondering where her accent is from. Thank you for joining us today, Bev.
Thank you, Linda, for inviting me.
So can you tell us how you ended up moving to Israel?
Yes, sure. Well, I lived 18 years in South Africa with my family. I grew up there. And, of course, a love story is involved, which was a boyfriend that I had that lived in Australia, and he was Australian. So I landed up actually going to live in Australia for almost 7 years. And we broke up, and then I decided to go traveling. And my sister lived in Israel, and I landed up coming to Israel and meeting my husband, my first husband, because I've been divorced. And that's actually how I landed up here. I landed up marrying an Israeli and having a baby. Well, we went to live in Australia for 2 years, and then we came back to Israel, and that's actually the beginning of when my health turned. So so I had we were living in Australia, and I fell pregnant with my daughter, and during the pregnancy I developed Graves' disease, and in Australia they don't really do that much checking, as far as pregnancies go. They do the very basics. And nobody actually picked it up until I was back in Israel. And it was, my daughter was, I think, about 5 months old. And I developed I was shaking, and I was very, very tired, and my eyes were bulging, and all these crazy things. I lost a huge amount of weight. And and that's when the whole thing started, when we found out that I actually had Graves' disease.
Mm-hmm. And what happened then?
Then what actually happened is that I'm a statistic, so no matter what side effect medication has, I'm bound to get it, which is really crazy. So what happened is they gave me medication to try and lower my levels of thyroxine, and I had a terrible reaction to it, of course, and I developed hives from it. So what they said to me was that most of the medication, or all of the medication to lower the thyroid, had the same sort of composition. So they said that the only choice that I really had was to go for radioactive iodine treatment. And at that time, I was very naive, and I had no idea about alternative medicine or alternatives as far as conventional medicine goes as well. So I landed up going for the radioactive iodine, which I think was the biggest mistake of my life, because it destroyed approximately 60% of my thyroid. And when I did speak to the doctor about it and asking, what would the repercussions of it being, he basically said, no, you'll live a very normal life, and all you'll have to do is take a small little tablet which will regulate your the production of your thyroxine, which is what the thyroid produces. And of course, off I went and I did this, and from then onwards I just had a nightmare, because I just couldn't get balanced. And I used to go from hyperactive to hypoactive, and from hypoactive to hyperactive. And the anybody who does suffer from a thyroid issue can understand that it's like you're on an emotional roller coaster, because your moods change, you've got no energy, you either putting on weight or losing weight. And in my case, I was just constantly losing weight. So it was a real issue for me. But what happened is that in the interim, I actually got divorced. And when I got remarried again, I wanted to fall pregnant again. And I had a miscarriage. And then I fell pregnant with my second child, which was fine. But then after that, I waited about a year and a half, and we wanted another child. And I landed up having 9 miscarriages.
Wow.
And we don't know what caused it, but we pretty much convinced that it was, also the fact that my levels were constantly out played a huge role. And at that stage, I knew nothing about LDN, and I didn't even know anything about any alternative treatments or anything like that. So what happened is in my last pregnancy, my doctor, I actually fell pregnant. What happened is that I fell pregnant. No, everybody said to me that I couldn't, that I must just forget about it after the 8th pregnancy. The 7th miscarriage. And we closed shop, and for 2 years, I decided that was it. We weren't going to have another baby, but for me it was terrible because all I wanted was to have another child. Mm-hmm. And in that time also, I was just as sick as anything. I was moods, weight problems, no energy, swinging from hyper to hypoactive. And I turned around to my husband one day. We were driving in the car, and I started crying. He said to me, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I said, "Look, I'm sorry. I have to try and have another baby." And he thought I was completely crazy. Because my daughter was already, I think she was, must have been about 12 or 13. Yeah, she was about 13. Must have been, there's about 13 and a half years difference. And my son was already 8. And I went to see a professor, and he said, "Okay, fall pregnant and let's see what happens." And that wasn't the issue. The issue was every time between 6 and 14 and a half, 15 weeks, I used to miscarry. And nobody could, as I said, nobody could find out why I was doing, why it was happening. So I lost 3 sets of twins. And I fell pregnant again, and this time it held, and I had my little girl. We call her a laat lammetjie, which is like a late lamb, which was amazing. I had a absolutely perfect pregnancy, terrible birth, but that's okay. And then she never slept for 4 years, but that was also okay. But after she was born, 8 months after she was born, I fell pregnant again by accident. And I found out straight away, and I went to see the doctor and said, "Look, I want to terminate before there's even a heartbeat. I don't want anything, because once there's a heartbeat, I can't terminate." And he said, "Don't worry, with your history, it will come away by itself." Anyway, it didn't. And they sent me for an ultrasound, and they said there was a discrepancy in the ultrasound. And my doctor just said, "No, don't worry, it will come away, it will come away." And it didn't. And eventually they gave me some medication to take it away. But at the same time, I don't know if you ever heard about the story about the pharmaceutical company in Israel changing the makeup of Naltrexone.
No.
Okay, so what happened is the pharmaceutical company in Israel decided to change the makeup of Naltrexone but not tell anybody. So there's still a lawsuit actually going on about it at the moment, but it had terrible, terrible, terrible effects on thousands and thousands of people. And one of them was me. I had a very bad reaction to it. But at that time, we didn't realize that it was a combination of the Naltrexone as well, because I'd fallen pregnant, as I told you, and my doctor had given me something to take the pregnancy away. But what happened is that he was going away on holiday, and I went to see him, and he did a semi-DNC in his office. And he said to me, "I would be fine, and don't worry, off you go." And a month later, I was very, very ill. And what started happening, and this is where it all happened, because I started developing like it looked like a fungus, like a fungal infection on my nail. And I started getting the most terrible cuts in my genital areas. Like, I would wake up in the morning and it would look like somebody had got a razor blade and just sliced me in all the creases in the anal area and the vaginal area. And we had no idea what was going on. And I landed up actually going to see, I think I must have seen at least 10 doctors, and nobody knew what was going on, because every time it would come and then it would disappear. So I would, let's say, make an appointment to see a doctor, and I would go and see them, and it would disappear. There wouldn't be anything there. And they'd think I was going crazy, and I thought that I was going crazy. The thing on my nail, they said, was not a fungus. So, and it started spreading to all my other nails, and it started spreading to my foot as well. But what happened while this was all going on is that in that month after I'd had the DNC from the pregnancy, my stomach swelled up. I started getting sweats. I was very, very ill. I developed all these funny things, as I said, the nail thing and the cuts and all that. And I landed up going to see another gynecologist, and they found that I'd had twins, and my doctor never picked it up. So I had a dead fetus in my tummy still. And and I was rushed into hospital, and they did another DNC, but the repercussions of it, because my system went into such shock from hormonal imbalance from, number one, the Naltrexone change, and number two, this foreign body that was inside my system, I landed up being diagnosed with 3 different kinds of psoriasis. I had nail psoriasis. I developed psoriasis all over my head, and a psoriasis called intima, a psoriasis intima, which is apparently, it usually attacks people that are very overweight because it attacks the creases in your body. But I'm exceptionally thin, and so this is the reason why it attacked all the places where it could find creases in my body, which was in my genital areas. Eventually, as I said, I was diagnosed by a skin specialist in Israel, and he just turned around to me and he said to me, "You can try methotrexate, small doses of methotrexate, but I don't believe that they're going to help you. You have got the plague. You must just know that you are cursed, and this is a curse for the rest of your life. Do whatever you can to try and get it under control, but it's incurable, and you must just learn to live with it." Anyway, what happened is it actually got worse and worse and worse, and it went into my joints, and I developed psoriatic arthritis. But by this stage, I had started studying and reading up about Isabella Wentz, the Hashimoto's queen or thyroid queen, and at that stage she had just released a whole thing called the Thyroid Secret, and I bought it and I started listening to this, and in the 3rd session they spoke about LDN. And by this stage, I think I had seen, I can't even imagine how many doctors. I was at the stage where I couldn't move at all. My joints were completely inflamed. My hands, I couldn't hold anything. I couldn't touch anything because my nails were so inflamed from the psoriasis, and my joints were so inflamed from the psoriatic arthritis, which I actually didn't even know I had until I went to a GP by accident because I had a stomach virus, and she looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, who is your rheumatologist?" And I looked at her and I said, "A rheumatologist? What's a rheumatologist?" She said, "Listen, you've got arthritis." And I looked at her completely blank, and she said, "If you don't get this treated," she said, "you are going to lose the function of your hand." So I immediately went into complete panic, as you can imagine, and I was just really sick. I had no energy. I couldn't move because I was in so much pain. I went to see specialists, and they said that they needed to operate on me because there was something wrong with my hips, and actually there was nothing wrong with my hips. I just had this terrible, terrible psoriatic arthritis and all this horrific autoimmune situation. At that stage, I remember I was, desperation isn't the word, because I think I tried everything. I went to see a functional medicine person who put me on this horrific diet that I lost 7.5 kilos. And at that time, I weighed about 54, 53 kilos. So I went down to like 47 or 48 kilos. I was like a walking skeleton. And I had a little baby at home as well. And it was living hell. I thought that I was actually, I thought that I was going to die. Honestly, quite honestly, that's where I was. And that's when I decided that I have to try and do something for myself, because the doctors and alternative medicine just didn't seem to be able to get it together. So as I said, I found out about LDN and I started researching it as much as I possibly could. And I couldn't find it anywhere in Israel. And I was just reading about it in America and about, I can't remember the name of that doctor, but the one who started in, I think it was 1987, with HIV positive patients and cancer patients and that. And I just started researching as much as I possibly could about LDN. At that stage, I was put onto methotrexate, which I had a horrific reaction to, and it lasted 3 days. They had to take me off it. And then I was put onto Enbrel, the biological Enbrel. And that definitely did help me. And I was using it for approximately a year and a half, or 2 years, I think it was. But in the interim, I was researching LDN. And what started happening is that in Israel, there was nobody that was prescribing it, nobody that knew about it. And I eventually found Dr. Andrew Shaler, the doctor that you mentioned to me. And I went to see him, and he prescribed it for me and explained to me how the dosage worked. My rheumatologist had no idea what it was, and he just said to me, listen, if you want to try it, you need to find a doctor that's prepared to monitor you, because I'm not prepared to take that responsibility. So I said, no problem. And I went to my GP, and she had no idea what LDN was either. And I actually begged her. I gave her all the research that I could possibly find on it. And I said to her that I was prepared to sign any waivers of responsibility, that I would take full responsibility if anything happened to me. But all I needed was for her to monitor me and to be able to prescribe it for me as I needed. And I started on 0.5 milligrams, and I slowly started building my way up. And while this was happening, I was starting to have which we think is a reaction to the Enbrel. I lost feeling on the right-hand side of my body. I was getting pins and needles in my face. I couldn't use the strength in the right-hand side of my body started going, and I was getting terrible pains in my legs and my arms in the evenings. And that's when I basically decided, that's it, I'm going full ball onto LDN, and I'm going to slowly wean myself off the biologicals. The LDN, the only real side effect that I found I had from it was initially I was getting very vivid dreams, and I wasn't sleeping properly. So all I did was I changed it through to the morning, as I've been reading was a common thing to do, for which I did for a week, and then I went back to the evenings and I was 100% fine. The other thing I experienced was I was getting headaches, but they passed as well, and blood noses. My nose used to bleed on and off, but all the time, which every now and again it does, because every time I have a hormonal change, or I'm before my period, or something changes in my body, my nose starts bleeding. I eventually weaned myself off the Enbrel, and at that stage, while I was busy with the LDN and the Enbrel and making all these changes, I made a huge lifestyle change. I made a huge dietary change. I went to study the psychology of eating, and I completely changed my life. And between the LDN, the change of lifestyle, and just food, nutrition, I stopped biologicals. I've been off biological medication for 2 years now. I've been on LDN for about 2.5 years. I'm on 6 milligrams a day, and I am completely psoriatic arthritis free. I have been for 1.5 years, nearly 2 years. And I am, I'd say, between 95 and 98% free of psoriasis on my nails and in my head and the interna. The only time that ever flares up is if I have a bit of the hormonal change, which is not that often. But yeah, and all I can say is that LDN has completely changed my life, and I coach other people, and I've recommended them to go onto LDN, which I'd say 4 of them have gone onto LDN, and they've had amazing results, absolutely amazing results. But I just wish that more people knew about it and more people were willing to try it and more doctors were open enough to give it a try, because it is just an amazing, amazing drug.
Mm-hmm.
And it's completely changed my life. I can't even explain it. I mean, the pain that I experienced before I went onto LDN, I mean, life wasn't even worth living. There's no words to describe it. You can't even, from a scale of 1 to 10, 0 being the worst and 10 being the best, I think I was a minus already. And LDN, I'm now over 10. You can't even, my life's back to normal. I have a completely normal life.
Wow.
And it really has. It's completely revolutionized my life and the way I look at approaching different autoimmune diseases and things like that. I just wish that more people knew about it,
mm-hmm.
because it is just an amazing drug.
Well,
amazing.
As you probably know, we have an LDN book, and the second LDN book is coming out in October. So that's really exciting.
Wow.
And we do conferences, which we live stream and record, and they're available for people to take part in wherever you live in the world. The next one, fingers crossed, is going to be in June 2021 in, let me get it right, Pennsylvania. But as I say, it will be live streamed around the world. So wherever you are, you can submit questions and join in. There's an online chat and things while the conference is happening. And then the recordings are available as well afterwards. So we have so much information at these conferences. It's amazing. And as you know, we do the radio shows as well. And we're on Vimeo and YouTube. Social media. I don't know whether you're a member of our Facebook group. We've got over 36,000. Yeah. And we've got 5 different pages. We're on LinkedIn. So we are trying very hard to get the word out there, but we need people like yourself who help and assist us, because we've been going now 16 years. And
wow, as long as 16 years?
Yes, I mean,
that is remarkable.
LDN was very hard to get hold of back then, but now, of course, it is easier and there are more people coming on board all the time, but we need advocates. And I found that the people who help drive it forward are people just like yourself, people where LDN has worked really well for, and they want the world to know about it. So thank you for helping us spread the word, and it was just an amazing story.
Oh, I'm so glad. And this is just the beginning. If I can get it out there as much as I possibly can, that's exactly what my goal is. That is 100% what I want to do. It's just spread it as much as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for having been our guest today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been amazing, really amazing. Thank you so much.
This show is sponsored by our members who made donations. We'd like to give them a very big thank you. We have to cover the monthly costs of the radio station's software, bandwidth, phone lines and phone calls to be able to continue with the radio show. And thank you for listening. Any questions or comments you may have, please email me, Linda, Linda, at ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciated your company. Until next time, stay safe and keep well.